Hi, my name is DM Barr, and I am an author of sex, suspense, and satire. My newest release, which is called Saving Grace, a psychological thriller, oops, excuse my green screen, is will be released on October 15th on Amazon and wherever fine books are sold. So I hope you'll pick up a copy. Today, my guest on Author Groupie is Jeff Rasley, who is a former attorney involved with many nonprofit organizations, and he has written a book that is highly political, and I think you might like to hear what he has to say. The book is called Anarchist, Republican, Assassin. It's one of 11 books that he's written. And we do get into some politics, so I hope you will sit back and enjoy. And I know you're used to me saying stay safe, but I'm going to add a couple of other directives for you. Wear your mask over your nose, please, and get out and vote. Thank you. Hi, and welcome to another edition of Author Groupie. I'm here with Jeff Rasley, who is a former attorney and the author of 11 books, the most recent being Anarchist, Republican, Assassin. He has published numerous articles in academic and mainstream periodicals, including Newsweek, Chicago Magazine, the ABA Journal, Family Law Review, the Journal of Communal Societies, and Friends Journal. He is an award-winning photographer, and his pictures have taken him to the Himalayas and the Caribbean and the Pacific Islands, and they've been published in several journals. He has appeared as a featured guest in over 100 radio and podcast programs, so we're glad you were able to spare time for us. He has engaged in social activism and philanthropic efforts from an early age, and he is currently the director of several nonprofit organizations. He retired from law in 2010, and he is a partner in the ebook publishing company Midsummer's Books. He provides writing coaching services and has taught classes at the IUPUI Continuing Ed Program, Indiana Writers Center, and Butler and Marion Universities. He is a graduate of University of Chicago and Indiana University School of Law, sorry about that. And he's married to Alicia Rasley, an English professor and author of writing craft books and historical romances, such as the Rita Award winner, The Year She Fell. I hope that's all correct. Welcome to Author Groupie.
Thank you, Dawn, for that long bio. And so I guess this will be my 101st podcast.
Yeah, except we're actually a Zoom webcast, so it's sort of a diversion or a divergent for you. So you've written 11 books and you've had over 80 articles published. What attracted you first to writing?
Well, I grew up in a family of journalists. My mom was a journalist, city editor of our local paper. My step-grandfather was the editor of that local paper, and then my stepfather followed him and became editor. And I married a writer. So that's, I suppose, just to be part of the family, it was required.
So you were sort of bullied into it through peer pressure.
I like your first term, inspired, better.
Okay. So what are the genres of the books you've written and the subjects of your articles, if you could sort of summarize them, or are they pretty divergent?
Well, it's pretty diverse. Probably the most articles and books have been could be described as adventure, spiritual travel. So a lot of writing about going to what would be considered exotic places in adventurous ways, out of which I thought I had something worth saying to readers other than just I did this cool thing.
Cool. Well, your first book was about the adventures you had in the Himalayan mountains and the developmental work you did with a village in Nepal. So how did someone from Indiana get involved in mountain climbing and end up all the way across the world?
I blame it on my wife. When I turned 40, I was having what she described and I admitted to as a midlife crisis. And the therapy she suggested was to go over to the Himalayas and trek the Everest Base Camp Trail. So I did, and I fell in love with the mountains, having grown up in Indiana. I really hadn't been in mountains very much, but I also just fell in love with the people who live in the high Himalayas. So I wanted to go back, and so I learned how to climb and just started joining and eventually leading mountaineering expeditions.
How many times have you been to Nepal?
I've been to Nepal 13 times, and then to the very tip top of India, area called Ladakh once.
And
So
how long is
14 times.
I'm sorry, how long is the flight from Indiana to Nepal?
It's awful. That's the worst part of it. It in total, from when I enter the Indianapolis airport and step off in Kathmandu, it's about 30 hours.
My dream was I was a travel writer for a long time, and my dream was to go to Kathmandu so I could say I just flew in from Kathmandu, and boy, are my arms tired. So you've actually done it many times. I'm very impressed.
Yes. Well, you should do it.
Yeah, when we're COVID over and I'm all vaccinated and I'm willing to go back on an airplane, I would like to resume traveling, because that would probably be the furthest I've been.
Well, if you decide to go, I can have friends waiting for you at the airport.
Very cool. I'll take you up on that.
Great.
So I'm going to come back to your new release, Anarchist, Republican Assassin, a political novel. What inspired you to write it, and tell us a little bit about what it's about?
Thanks. I was inspired to write it the day after George Floyd was murdered by a cop in Minneapolis, and I saw on TV images of what were peaceful demonstrations turning into violent riots. And I actually started writing it that night. And the personal inspiration was back in the early 70s. I experienced peaceful demonstrations that were intentionally turned into riots by anarchists. And I saw that being repeated with the Black Lives Matter protests. And it just, this character just sort of blew up in my mind. And I started writing about his life. And he was an anarchist as a young man and became a Republican, and then was driven crazy by Donald Trump.
As we all are.
Yeah, well, sometimes you have to be careful before you make that assumption, because some people, well, we might think they've been driven crazy, but they see it differently.
I'm just joking. Joking. So I noticed that you classify the book as dark humor, which was interesting. What is it? Dark humor?
It's dark humor in the sense that there's a darkness to the story, which is due to the way Donald Trump has handled the pandemic and the issues of racial justice raised by Black Lives Matter. Because this Republican guy, who's a rich guy, an industrialist, who's really a pillar of the Republican Party, starts going crazy in terms of how he responds to the way Trump is handling the most difficult issues of Trump's presidency, because he feels like Trump is violating all of what Jack, the protagonist's name, what Jack thinks are the principles of republicanism. And so it's kind of darkly funny in the sense that this loyal Republican is actually going insane because of his response to this situation that he finds himself in, which is that the immediate situation is the lockdown, and his wife had just died.
Oh, wow.
So he's very much all alone. And so there's this sadness to the story. There's also what I think is really a beautiful romance within the story, which is Jack falling in love with his wife and having a long marriage. Um, so it's it weaves together really sort of a number of genres, because could be accurately described as a legal thriller, a political thriller with a romance inside of it.
Right. That kills my next question.
No, sorry.
Sorry. So he's extremely critical of Donald Trump in the handling of the pandemic and the Black Lives Matter protests, as you said. Does Jack express your own views of President Trump in the handling of these challenges?
Yes. Yeah. And that was, I mean, sort of an ulterior motive for writing the book. It wasn't what inspired it, but as I got to explain why Jack was getting increasingly upset, it reflects my own view of how incompetently and chaotically I think Trump has handled the virus. And I think Attorney General Barr and Trump have very badly, insensitively handled the Black Lives Matter movement and the protests following George Floyd's murder. So so I get to express my own views about that through Jack, but in more extreme ways, because I haven't gone insane.
Right.
I think.
Right. Now you're from Indiana, where
Yes.
Pence is from. So do you?
I know Mike Pence.
Do you? Well, there's a whole new conversation.
Mike Pence worked as a summer intern for a law firm that I was an associate with, and I was on the recruiting committee and got to participate in the review of his performance at the end of the summer.
Wow. So what my question was going to be is, because you come from Pence country, and I would imagine it's heavily Republican and pro Trump and Pence around you, were you a little nervous publishing this book and a little nervous of any reprisal?
No, not at all. I would welcome reprisals. Living in Indianapolis, I live in the neighborhood in Indianapolis that is considered the sort of the most liberal, hip area of Indianapolis. So in my neighborhood, you don't see very many Trump signs. But Indiana generally, yes, is a pretty red state. Although it's also sort of an ambivalent state, because we voted for Obama the first time around, um, and then voted for Romney the second time around, but then voted heavily for Trump. So but if you go to other neighborhoods in Indianapolis, or especially if you go down into southern Indiana, excuse me, lots of Trump signs.
I'm sure. Now, you wrote another book, Polarized: The Case for Civility in the Time of Trump. What was the message of that book, and has your opinion of the Trump administration changed since it was published in 2017?
Well, the message of that book was very different because and that's nonfiction.
Right.
What I was trying to do in that book is the theme of it was to encourage civility and to reduce the intense polarization of our country following the 2016 election. My initial opinion of Donald Trump was very negative from the very beginning. And I include that in the afterword to the book. But the body of the book itself is neutral in the sense that it doesn't judge Donald Trump beyond making the point that in the campaign he contributed to the polarization of our country by his sort of bullying, nasty campaigning. But in terms of what I thought he would do as president, it was not critical of that because I was actually writing it right after the election. And that was inspired by a Facebook discussion forum that I hosted. And the forum had a different political issue each week, and 80 people participated. About 2/3 were Clinton voters and about a third Trump voters. But we engaged in civil discussions for several months over on these topics. And the one rule was you could not personally attack another participant in the forum. You could say what you want about Trump or Clinton or any other politician, but you could not, you know, personally attack somebody else. And with that simple rule, these people who were, you know, very polarized politically were able to engage in civil discourse. So that's what the book was trying to promote.
Do you think you could replicate that in 2020? That kind of civil discourse?
I think it would be more difficult, but I still think it's possible if people would just follow that rule. I mean, I know, you know, people are very, very emotionally invested on both sides of pro-Trump, anti-Trump. But when you just talk about specific issues, okay, you know, immigration, I mean, pick whatever issue. If you're willing to listen to what people on the other side have to say, what we discovered in that forum is that there are some sort of basic principles that we all agreed on. I mean, for example, just I picked out of the hat immigration. No, the most pro-Trump people didn't think we should just absolutely close the borders and let nobody in. And the most anti-Trump people did not think we should just have totally open borders and that anybody could just come into the country. So then it becomes, okay, we actually have a fundamental agreement here. How do we find a policy that takes into consideration, you know, the sides of that issue where there is commonality to be found?
But now
And if you
we're
can talk civilly to each other, you may be able to find that solution.
I don't know where you find a common ground when it comes to white supremacy.
Um, okay, there weren't any, at least admitted white supremacists that participated in my forum. I mean, there were people who, there was one person who made what I considered a racially insensitive comment in the discussion, but then he went on to defend himself and say that he had a mixed race grandchild. And so, yeah, I mean, people who are true white supremacists, you're probably right, but people who may be somewhat racist, I, I still hold out I hold out hope for people like that, because I think many of us are somewhat racist, but we overcome that.
Well, I'd love to hear a few pages of your book if you would like to read it for our viewers.
Okay, sure. Then the coronavirus hit. When the mayor and government issued their Hoosier hunker down orders, my feeling of isolation and alienation really spiked. The housekeeper and lawn maintenance guy I hired couldn't come to the house. I couldn't go out to eat or even get a cup of coffee at the Starbucks on Illinois and 56th Street. I felt so lonely with nobody to talk to. I started feeling irrationally irritable and had terrible mood swings. I threw the toaster down on the kitchen floor and then stomped on it. I was furious because 2 pieces of toast burned. I probably set the timer on for too long, but I didn't care whether it was my fault or the toaster's. I just wanted to smash the damn thing. I sat in front of the TV hour after hour watching the news about how Trump was fucking up the government's response to the spreading coronavirus infection? Why didn't he invoke the federal government's power under the Defense Production Act as soon as the virus hit Washington state? Instead, he ignores the CDC's advice and downplays the risk to the nation's health. But the number of infections kept rising. By the end of March, the US led the world in infections and deaths caused by the virus. What does Trump do? He refuses to wear a mask. He's not going to look like a weakling. Testing? Overrated. It increases the number of infections. Why doesn't the country have enough PPE and ventilators? Obama's fault. The president is in charge, but if there's any failure, it's the fault of the governors and mayors. He keeps repeating his mantra, the situation is under control. Those people wearing masks are doing it to spite me, Donald J. Trump, the greatest president in the history. The situation is under control. But the deaths kept mounting. It surpasses annual deaths from auto accidents, 34,000. It surpasses US deaths in the Vietnam War, 58,000. It surpasses total deaths of US soldiers in World War I, 116,500, and it keeps going up. We're number one. Trump made America great again. He said with him as president, America would win so much we get tired of winning. Right on, man. We are number one in coronavirus infections and deaths. And then he muses about sticking a UV light down your gullet or drinking Clorox as a cure. Presidents aren't supposed to muse about harebrained schemes that will get some numbskull killed when he burns his throat with a tanning lamp or poisons himself with laundry bleach. After spending all day switching back and forth among the cable news networks on TV, I turn off the television and get on my laptop and rant on Twitter about what an idiot the president was. But there's Trump on the tube again. He's claiming victory over the virus. The economy is already recovering. He says America's roaring back greater than ever. And by the way, Donald J. Trump has done more for African Americans than any US president. Lincoln? All he did was free the slaves. Donald J. Trump gave them all jobs. I turn off the TV and open Twitter. What do I find? All these Trumpers are praising the president. Don't believe those traitors in the media and that Dr. Fauci who says things are getting worse. God chose the Donald to save us from the virus. I was cycling farther and farther down, and I couldn't stop it. When the demonstrations started in Minneapolis after George Floyd was killed by that cop, that's when something completely snapped in me, and I really lost control.
Wow. And yet I feel like I've lived through that, all of that. I think we all have lived through that. You put it very, very well, very succinctly. Sounds like a book that everybody out there should probably pick up. It's available on Amazon and anywhere else.
Any bookstore can order it. I have a website. You can order it through the website, although it's just linked to Amazon.
Right, and we'll publish the website at the end of the interview, so everybody will read it. So the name of the book is Anarchist, Republican, Assassin. It's one of 11 books of Jeff's that you can pick up. Thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate it. And please, I hope you stay safe.
Thank you, Dawn, and I hope you and your listeners stay safe as well.
Thank you. You have a good day.
Over the river to the city far from home. The toll booth takes my money.